Welcome back. We're discussing a provocative new perspective on Israel's past that questions the traditional history of the Jewish people and envisions a different future for everyone living in the region. Joining me from London is Shlomo Sand, Professor of Contemporary History at Tel Aviv University and author of the book The Invention of the Jewish People, which has just been released in English after causing a political storm in Israel, spending 19 weeks on the bestseller list. As we get back to our discussion, George in the UK has been waiting very patiently. George, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, one of my colleagues actually forwarded me some online information about your book, and I read some transcript online, and it said something which was shocking to me, and this is that you are saying that most of the Jews are actually not Semites. I mean, I don't know if you could please just fill us in about this. If I read it correctly, maybe I misread it. And the second question is, I just heard you saying that you would like to live in Israel, in an Israeli state, not a Zionist Jewish state, alongside the Palestinians. But then, what happens when the Palestinians vote democratically for a militant government like Hamas, and then the Israelis, who are very good friends of the UN, depose that government and install a secular...
George, two interesting questions. I'm going to start with the first one to Professor. The Semitic history of Israelis or Jews in Israel. Go ahead.
No, I don't think that the Jewish are Semitic. We can start with something that I mentioned before. The exile of the Jew in the first century of our era didn't happen. There is not any scientific research book about the exile. It's a myth, the exile of the Jew, and I think that most of the Jew in the world came from conversion, massive conversion, from the beginning of the first century till the 18th century. Jewishness was the first proselyte monotheism, and most of the Jews are descendant of conversion and not of racist descendant from the ancient Hebrew. This I hope that I answer you. I think that the Berbers in North Africa become Jew were in North Africa before the Arabs arrived there. I think that the Jews were in Ukraine before most of the Russians were there. And so on and so on. Yes, the Jewish are not Semitic. Most of them are not Semitic. This is for the first question. For the second question, it was about...
yeah, so if the second question was about if Palestinians and Israelis were to live together in a United States.
I think that it is misunderstanding. I don't think in this step of history, in this time of history, we can politically thinking about one solution state. I think that the Israeli army has to be drawn up from all the occupied territory. I think that a Palestinian state has to exist beside Israel, but it's very important to understand that Israel has to be an Israeli state, not a Jewish state. Israel has to belong to everybody that is living and working in Israel and not the Jewish in the world. Now, about Hamas and about this threat menace that the Hamas will govern, I am speaking about two states. I think that these two states have to be confederate, because we cannot live in the Middle East without Arabs. No. If somebody in Israel don't want to live without Arabs, he has to leave the Middle East. But I'm speaking about two-state solution.
Professor, interestingly, interestingly, we had an email that came from Greece. If I could put this to you, from Vicky Nikolaidis, who says, I'm curious as to how the centuries which evolved before Judaism on the land of modern Palestine can be ignored by the archaeological history. Now, I wonder, you also say, if I'm correct in your book, that many of the Palestinians who were there on the land were actually converted from Judaism as well.
Not only this, it's not me. A lot of people criticize me that I pretend that Palestinians are the real Jew. Not at all. It's David Ben-Gurion and others, first Zionists, that when they arrived to Palestine, they were sure that the Arab peasant in place are the descendant of the ancient Hebrew. It's not Shlomo Sand, it's David Ben-Gurion that till the 1929 believed that the Arab peasant are the descendant of the ancient Hebrew, and they were converted from Judaism to Islam in the 7th century after Jesus Christ. It's not me that you know, put it forward, and I believe that Ben-Gurion was more or less right. I mean, I don't believe that the Palestinians today are the direct descendant of the ancient Hebrew. They are mixed like every other people. But the chance that a member of Hamas in Hebron will be a descendant of the ancient Hebrew, ancient Jew, is much more greater than my affiliation to this.
Now, Professor, it's interesting. There's a lot of times when we've discussed the issue of Zionism on this show, there are those who have the view that those living outside Israel, the Jewish people, many of the Jewish people living outside Israel, are more hardline and Zionist than those within Israel, that those who live on the ground there in the Middle East and see the reality are actually a little more liberal in their view on how things are. Do you find that to be the case, that those who are outside are actually more protective of Israel, you know, even though they don't live there?
Yes, sometimes. I don't want to generalize, but you know, to compare the reception of the book in, for example, by the established Jewish in Paris and by the Israelis, it's much more easier for me in Israel than in Paris. Now, there is a lot of Zionists that are much less liberal than the Israel society, and they think that by putting in question the historical origin of the Jew, I put in question the existence of Israel. Now, they are much more patriots sometimes than the Israelis themselves. Yeah.
Let me put an email to you that came from Ansar Bakshi, and this brings us in some ways full circle to the debate and some of the ideas you've put forward. Ansar Bakshi wrote in saying, do you feel there is an ineradicable culture of belligerence towards any peacemaking efforts in Israel? And if not, what can be done to make tangible progress and changing the mindset of the country? How do you think Israelis' minds can be changed?
Well, you know, I try to prophesize the past, not the future. It's difficult to be a prophet, you see. But what can change? You see, I'm not sure about it. You see, I think that Israel is not looking today for peace. You know, as I said before, today the Arab world more or less accepts the existence of this state. But this state don't want to be integrated in the Middle East. What can make the Israelis to be more sure about themselves, to accept the otherness? I don't know exactly, you see. I'm an Israeli citizen that try to live in the Middle East. And I think that the future of the Israelis is to live with the Palestinians. How to do it, really, I don't know. You know, I don't know if it will come with the pressure from outside, but Israel has to quickly change before the next catastrophe.
Okay, we have 1 minute to go, and Shazan's on the line from Pakistan. Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you think the painful history of the Holocaust should be used in any way as a justification for Israel to possess nuclear weapons?
Okay, Professor?
Not at all. Not at all. I don't think that suffering of the past can justify suffering of the present. Holocaust cannot justify nothing. It has to be remembered as one of the biggest tragedy in history. But it's, you know, it doesn't justify that somebody will have a nuclear and menace the other one to you know, Holocaust is not a justification of nothing at all.
Professor, thank you very much for being with us. The Invention of the Jewish People is the book by Professor Shlomo Sand. Thank you for sending in your questions. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there, and you can give us feedback on what we're broadcasting and post your questions and comments. On the next show, Honduras's political crisis. The election is over. How truly free and fair was it, and where does the country go from here? Be sure to tune in for that with your questions from me and the team. Until then, we'll see you next time.